noite a todos. Bem-vindos à Nova. O meu nome é Daniel Traça, sou diretor aqui da faculdade e tenho nem sei bem o adjetivo para usar, o enorme prazer de vos dar as boas-vindas aqui, sendo, não é só este espaço, que já foi inaugurado, já teve uma grande festa, mas esta biblioteca em particular. Este é o primeiro evento em conjunto com a Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, e é um momento que é um momento de enorme importância. E antes de falarmos um bocadinho do que é que se vai passar, eu gostava de falar um bocadinho do que é que isto representa. A família e os descendentes, a Sra. Teresa e o Sr. Santos Vastos Santos, foram as primeiras pessoas que acreditaram no projeto da Nova. Foram as primeiras pessoas que acharam que em Portugal fazia sentido criar-se um projeto com uma ambição internacional na área do conhecimento, na área do talento, e que desde o princípio, quando mais ninguém acreditava, isto nem era um sonho, era uma ideia, um pensamento, disseram sim, faz sentido e vamos fazer isto. E com isto davam seguimento àquilo que tinha sido já uma dedicação recente de toda a família, àquilo que é o conhecimento, àquilo que é o saber e ao papel que o conhecimento e o saber devem ter naquilo que será o Portugal do futuro. E a Nova foi mais um passo nisso, o envolvimento com a Nova, o facto de terem escolhido a biblioteca como ponto focal da sua contribuição para a escola, foi mais um ponto nesta ideia fundamental, que é uma ideia que partilhamos e que eu acho que partilhamos todos os que estamos nesta sala, de que o conhecimento e o saber são as plataformas nos quais Portugal vai ter um futuro, e nas quais Portugal pode fazer diferença, nas quais o impacto daquilo que fazemos se pode fazer sentir. E, portanto, este espaço deve ser uma catedral do saber e do conhecimento erguido sobre aquilo que é a vontade e aquilo que é a dedicação da Sra. Teresa Vastos Santos e da sua família. E, portanto, um enorme agradecimento a eles, aos membros da família aqui presentes, e uma enorme dedicação minha e de toda a escola, que alguns estão aqui, mas outros estão lá a trabalhar, e todos os alunos, a assegurarem que este espaço vai ser exatamente isso. Um espaço onde se pensa, um espaço onde se trazem ideias novas e um espaço onde se usa educação e conhecimento para projetar Portugal mais longe e para fazer um Portugal mais forte. Hoje estamos numa altura que é uma altura complicada na nossa vida. Se ligarem a televisão, quando chegarem a casa, vão ver a quantidade de problemas que se passam neste mundo e vão ter várias pessoas a darem opiniões sobre esses problemas. Umas pessoas que vão dizer que isto é uma questão de modas, isto é uma questão de notícias e não é mais do que notícias. Não é verdade. Nós hoje temos, de facto, uma sociedade, em Portugal e fora de Portugal, que vive desafios enormes. Temos um século XXI à porta não, já cá estamos, mas estamos no hall de entrada do século XXI, e quando olhamos para toda a casa, que se vai para todos os quartos, o que vemos são portas embaciadas, em que olhamos para a frente e dizemos: não sabemos bem o que vem aí. Podem vir oportunidades enormes, trazidas pela tecnologia, pelo digital, mas também, quando ligamos a televisão, vem um certo receio, vem um certo medo do que é que toda esta mudança vai trazer. E, de facto, é este o mundo que nós vivemos hoje, é este mundo de alguma ansiedade sobre o que é que o futuro nos traz. E essa ansiedade vem de problemas reais que as pessoas sentem. As pessoas nas suas vidas, os jovens, os menos jovens, as pessoas que veem questões de privacidade, de dados, têm receio de problemas reais. Aquilo que passou em questões como o Facebook foram problemas reais, e problemas reais na vida de pessoas reais. Portanto, não é só um hype. São problemas reais que surgem e problemas diferentes e novos. E esses problemas diferentes e novos só vão ser resolvidos quando nós, e eu volto aqui a estas duas palavras, conhecimento e escola, quando nós conseguirmos conceber ideias novas para esses problemas que são novos, ideias novas, soluções novas, é parte do conhecimento, e conseguimos nas escolas formar as pessoas e o talento com a capacidade de os fazer viver, de os fazer acontecer. Portanto, eu não me vou alongar mais, mas vou só dizer que este espaço, que deve ser realmente a catedral do saber numa escola, deve ser também o espaço onde o futuro se pensa, o espaço onde, nestes desafios digitais todos que estão a chegar, nestes desafios de tecnologia todos que estão a chegar, vamos conseguir conceber o conhecimento, as tais soluções novas, e vamos conseguir preparar os líderes, as tais pessoas, com a capacidade de fazer diferença. E é só quando a partir deste espaço e de outros, conseguirmos novas soluções e novas pessoas com capacidade de os implementar, que vamos conseguir fazer esta mudança fundamental neste ciclo de medo que se começa hoje a desenvolver e transformá-lo num ciclo de esperança, e num ciclo de esperança para as pessoas todas, e que pare de sair desta ansiedade que traz o pior dos seres humanos para a esperança que traz o melhor nos seres humanos. E eu acho que é isso que este espaço representa, é isso que as figuras todas que estão ali a ver à vossa volta representam, é esta vontade de que pelo conhecimento e pelo talento se faça uma diferença para o melhor, para a humanidade. E é isto que a Nova é, e é isto que esta parceria entre a família da senhora Teresa e o senhor Alexandre Soares dos Santos e todas as pessoas que aqui estão, e esta escola quer representar, e é isso que nós como escola nos dedicamos todos os dias desde que aqui estamos. Muito obrigado.
Boa tarde também, vou tentar ser muito breve para não me colocar entre vós e aquilo que nós queremos hoje ouvir do nosso proeminente convidado, o professor Hirsch. É para ele, em primeiro lugar, as primeiras palavras que, em nome da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, queria dedicar, dizer-lhe que o senhor nos dá com a sua presença um enorme ânimo. O senhor é uma lenda e é também uma referência para todos nós. Quando iniciámos o desenho deste mês da Educação e da Ciência, que hoje aqui terminamos, obviamente não pudemos deixar de visitar o seu nome e, pela mão do professor Nuno Crato, conseguimos trazê-lo, a quem agradeço também. Quero agradecer ao comissário deste mês da Educação e da Ciência, o professor Carlos Filhais, que nos levou durante um mês inteiro a várias cidades do país. Estivemos, e mais tarde, no final desta sessão, o meu colega Gonçalo Matias fará uma breve súmula do que foi este mês da Educação e da Ciência. Dizer que passámos por Aveiro, passámos por Coimbra, passámos pelo Funchal, e em todos os locais tivemos salas como esta, cheias de pessoas interessadas em debater os assuntos que realmente nos convocam para pensar a educação e a ciência. É por isso também que queria aqui hoje agradecer a vossa presença, o terem vindo até aqui, acredito que para muitos pela primeira vez, e também por isso seguramente que estão a sentir o mesmo que eu, que é um profundo agradecimento ao professor Daniel Traça e à sua equipa, que teve coragem para erguer um projeto que tem, obviamente, uma classe absolutamente mundial e que nos orgulha e que nos prestigia também como país. Agradecer a quem nos recebe pela primeira vez nesta biblioteca. Nós sentimos também uma certa emoção por estar aqui, porque fomos fundados pela família, e agradeço também a presença do Dr. Henrique Soares dos Santos e da Inês Soares dos Santos, que representam aqui o vosso pai e a vossa mãe e que nos presta um apoio fundamental de recursos para podermos trabalhar todos os dias na Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. E dizer-vos que este tema de hoje, e é o tema que nos convoca, o conhecimento, a escola e a era digital, é o que vamos tentar hoje descobrir. De facto, qual é o contexto em que é possível discutir o conhecimento numa era em que a escola e todos nós nos movemos no digital. Acredito que este seja um desafio absolutamente extraordinário para este fim de tarde. Quero por isso também dizer-vos que aqui marcamos encontro desde já no ano que vem. É a primeira vez que o fazemos em público, mas dizer que a Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos ainda não chegou à universidade, tem 9 anos, faz 10 anos no dia 12 de fevereiro de 2019, mas a partir daí dizer-vos que temos um compromisso para com o país de ir ao encontro dos portugueses mais do que nunca e levar os grandes temas à discussão, enchendo salas, algumas maiores que esta, mas deixando a promessa de que vamos voltar daqui a um ano para encerrar não só os nossos 10 anos, mas também o próximo mês da Educação e da Ciência. E por agora não vos maço mais, quero que agradecer também ao professor João Lopes ter aceito dinamizar, moderar, animar esta sessão, e é com ele que vos deixo, agradecendo uma vez mais ao professor Hirsch ter vindo de tão longe para nos aturar. Muito obrigado.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try it in English, okay? I'm just trying. I can't promise anything. First of all, I like to thank to the foundation to invite me to be here. For me, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Professor Hirsch. Since, I don't know, 20 years ago, I've been reading your works, and I never thought I would be here with you today. So, thanks to the Foundation, Francisco Manuel dos Santos, it's really a pleasure, and to Professor Nuno Curato that personally invited me, and to the family. Thank you. Well, what could I say about a person with such clear and structured thought like yours, and very current, all in the last, I don't know, 30, 50 years. I don't know exactly. Well, Professor Hirsch is an emeritus professor of education and humanities at the University of Virginia, but is widely known because of the Core Knowledge Foundation, but mainly the Core Knowledge Schools. The movement that is the Core Knowledge is, I think, that is a way of transforming an idea and a thought in an educational project. And I think that when one reads what are the core knowledge schools, one understands that there's a belief, a truly belief, that education can make a difference for many people, for many children. And I think that mainly that movement shows the idea that, look at the term core knowledge, what I think what the movement tries is to transmit from one generation to the next generation what is considered the core knowledge of humanity, what we know nowadays, and what we must give to our children, to our grandchildren, and so on. And of course, that knowledge is evolving. What it will be in the 22nd century is different from today. It's evolving, but I think that the main idea is to live to our children that core knowledge. Not by chance, the curriculum of core knowledge schools is a very structured schools, and there is no afraid to teach to children of 7 years things about Mesopotamia.
Exactly.
That's it, your frats, and things like that. Well, eventually, I learned about Mesopotamia in the 5th grade or so, but I could have learned it when I was 4. There was no problem about that. And I think that that's one of the most important messages that the core knowledge movement and Professor Hirsch transmits to us. It is possible to defy the human capacity and give that the human mind the opportunity to be richer, much and much richer, if you start earlier. As you will see in the communication, the idea that you can teach and you can transmit your culture, your values, almost since we are born, it's a very important idea from this movement. And I will say no more, because I hope you will be delighted with the communication. I know the communication, yet. Thank you. It's a great communication, and I think that after hearing you, we can discuss a lot about this communication and also about your life and about your work. For those who don't know, this is one of the most interesting books Professor Hirsch wrote, The Schools You Need and Why We Don't Have Them. We are better. We are better. And I also would recommend, do you know this? Do you remember this?
Oh, yes.
This is a great article, because it is a cross between my own background. I am a psychologist at the University of Minho, this is in the cross of psycholinguistics, education for one side, psychology. You even get one of the most important works in psychology. It's the Magical Number 7 from George Miller. You must read it. It's a great, great paper. And that great lesson about memory and chess from Adrien de Groot.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Dutch researcher. Adrien de Groot was a chess gamer, a great chess gamer, and was a psychologist, experimental psychologist. And well, you must read this. This is wonderful. Professor, thank you for being here. Thank you for this opportunity for us. And please.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Professor Lopes. I want to start, though, by, well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who actually got me here, which wasn't so easy at the last 24 hours. And I want to particularly thank Minister Nuno Crato, who actually has put some of these ideas into effect in Portugal. And I don't know whether you in this room realize it, but the progress that has been made in Portuguese schools from the early grades up to age 15. Age 15 is when the international tests come, called PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. And Portugal has gone just like this with each succeeding test. It's a very remarkable progress. It's, there's only one other country that showed that kind of progress, and that was Germany. And what happened there was that they were beset by progressive education in Germany, despite their high intellectual tradition. And what happened in Germany in the year 2000 was given the first PISA test. And that test showed Germany rather well, way down about number 30 among the nations, or whatever it was, and it was a national crisis because Germany didn't feel it should be that far down in the list, and it decided to institute what is essentially a core knowledge curriculum in the early grades, and they have also made the same kind of progress Portugal has, and actually Portugal is now ahead of the USA in its reading scores. And reading scores, well, for reasons that I'll adumbrate in this talk, are the most indicative scores, particularly for early, well, generally the most predictive scores. If you analyze the PISA scores for these 15-year-olds, you'll find that there's a high correlation between how well a nation does in reading and how well it does in science. The three things that are tested in the PISA are science and math and reading. And somehow or other, I hope that, I wish this were a class. This is a university, and I see a lot of young students here as well as their elders, but and so we could have some back and forth. And I hope that you understand my English. I have no Portuguese, whatever. And so I want to start, though, by thanking Minister Crato for bringing me here, and also the Foundation for making the flight possible. And I want to focus, as I indicated, on language, especially the first 6 or 7 years of schooling before age 15. If you look at, in the United States, at the long-term results, there is unfortunately a consistent determinism in reading scores. If it's a low score at age 9, there will be, relatively speaking, an even lower score at age 17, which is by the end of the match by age 17. In fact, the gap between high and low scorers will have widened in the intervening 8 years. So schooling in the United States today between 9 and 17 does not narrow language gaps, it widens them. But there are exceptions, and that's what's so interesting about the core knowledge schools that Professor Lopes mentioned. When students follow a shared curriculum that's well planned, we know with confidence that all children reach higher reading scores, all of them, including the advantaged students. But the gap between high and low scores is greatly narrowed. The gap narrowing becomes ever less probable, increasingly improbable with each passing year. The early grades are critical. And on the other hand, they also offer immense opportunities for improving the well-being of a whole country. The predestination, let's call it that, of language ability by age 9 or so is not basically hard to explain. Schooling itself takes place within the medium of language. So if your score is low and you're in the same class as some students who score high in reading and therefore in listening ability, you will be gaining knowledge at a slower rate than they are gaining knowledge. And that's because your language deficit is also a knowledge and learning deficit. A reading test at age 17 is inherently a knowledge test. That, Professor Lopes, I defer to Professor Lopes, that is his field. And that's the key issue to understand. I've written 4 books on that subject. I won't belabor it here. If in a child's school career from grade K to 12, that child's learning less in a day than her verbal peers are learning, her knowledge and language deficit increases. And that's the reason why we got the data that I mentioned just a minute ago. Language comprehension is the cause, and the basis for language comprehension is prior relevant knowledge. We used to think that, learning vocabulary in isolation was the key. But vocabulary without the relevant knowledge, the general whole situation that the knowledge represents is useless and is not comprehended. So I want to reveal from the start, there are great debates about early childhood education, as all of you know, particularly about grades K through 6. And they induce emotion, especially if in the United States, if you advocate a common curriculum, whereas there's a lot of emphasis on personalized learning and an individualized curriculum, a lot of that dating back to the Romantic period. But there's a lot of evidence over the past 2 decades, including the PISA scores that I mentioned, but also plus new studies that clearly show the superior effectiveness of the common curricula idea. That by no means negates what's true about the importance of individuality and of individual independence and initiative. Of course, that's extremely important too. And I also think there are points of consilience, of agreement between the focus on individuality and the focus on commonality. The 2 goals aren't quite as inherently opposed as we partisans tend to make them. That's because schooling already takes place in a social context, which depends on commonality. human individuality is inherently post-socialization. The human infant, as an individual, is helpless in almost every respect. From its earliest days, it depends on caregiving, on the learning of language. Nature had to start us early before we could flourish, before we could competently take care of ourselves. Because, just a minute, I just want to be sure I didn't skip a page, because our brains haven't even finished growing as a newborn infant. No matter how various personalities and individualities, that elemental need for communication and help has to foster human socialization and human language from the start, between the mother and the child, between the child's environment without a mother. Whatever the situation is, the child is dependent on others. Behind our house in the country in Virginia, there's a herd of cows, and it's astonishing to see how the cow gives birth to a calf, and the calf stands up and wanders around and goes off on its way. I mean, to somebody who was new to the country, this is all pretty astonishing. And it's not the case with human beings. So the socially enmeshed, constituted nature of human individuality has become ever more thematized in recent research, and even in developmental psychology itself. Here are some characteristic titles in developmental psychology, recent studies. Now, I don't know how many of you have studied Piaget, but in the United States, Piaget is the key psychologist that students of education study. And it supports the idea of education as development. And the current studies in that field have titles like this from 2012, Cross-Cultural Differences in Cognitive Development, Attention to Relations and Objects. That's the name of one study. From 2016 is a study, East-West Cultural Differences in Context Sensitivity are Evident in Early Childhood. Here's another from 2016, Cultural Differences in Visual Object Recognition in 3-year-olds. Piaget's definite stage theory of cognition of the child's psychic growth has essentially been disconfirmed by observing quite different patterns of how development occurs and under socialization in these different cultures. You grow up differently in Switzerland, where Piaget conducted his experiments, than you do in China. And if the Chinese version of Piaget, he would have reported slightly different results. So when I say that current science supports the absolute primacy of the social, that doesn't necessarily neglect the individual. It's simply a fundamental fact about human psychology. The primacy of the social derives not just from language and from the field of psycholinguistics, where I had a start, but also shows up in recent advances and in developmental psychology as well, and evolutionary psychology and microbiology, which I'll have a bit to say about here in this paper, because there's very interesting news from microbiology. All of them are confirming the priority of the social in human education. But that is hardly a new story. We're so influenced in the West by the Romantic period in our view of education that we've forgotten that even in the Western tradition, it was always been pretty clear that the primary of the social is there. Aristotle starts his politics, which are all humans are social. All humans are political. I think it really is Aristotle's beginning. And here's the really, I think, the interesting part of this talk, because in the year 2005, we proved that the human neocortex really is a blank slate. That's a pretty darn important finding for education. I use 2005 as a convenient date because it's the publication year of a report in the Proceedings of the American National Academy of Sciences entitled The Neocortical Microcircuit as a Tabula Rasa. That is, as a blank slate. I have to grant that I had never heard of the neocortex before I read this. The cortex is a well-known thing, the main part of the brain. It's another word for the cortex, but the frontal part, it's the late, and neo because it's the most late evolved part of the brain where you have language and essentially the elements that distinguish humans from other creatures. The amygdala, the hippocampus, they're found in other creatures, what sometimes called the reptilian brain. But the human brain has this larger thing. It's why humans take so long to develop. It's why they have to be social, because the brain hasn't yet fully developed. The head has to grow even bigger. Anyway, I have an email message, I'm glad to say, from the first author of that article, and he puts to me, in his message to me, he puts the case this way. The biological circuitry in the cortex is so flexible as to allow any form of knowledge and behavior to be taught to it. Let me read it. The biological circuitry in the cortex is so flexible as to allow any form of knowledge and behavior to be taught to it. I interpret that blanket pronouncement, which is now pretty well established at the microbiological level. It's a fascinating article, by the way, to read. To say that evolution has formed the human child so that it is inherently natural for some of our diverse earlier inheritances in the reptilian brain to be guided and controlled and even thwarted by later evolved language and knowledge and in those parts of our brain in the neocortex. They produce rules and maxims, not from inborn instincts, but from the surrounding society. We've always known that humans can be perverse and unnatural. We're only just now learning that being unnatural is our great gift from nature, who gave us this blank slate. The new science of the neocortex doesn't challenge the child's individuality. Each child's very different genetically, yes. But the new science says that each child's blueprint for development, including that child's individuality, is incompletely defined. Unlike other creatures, we're not born with an inherent developmental blueprint. The implications of that insight are hardly new. I'll quote a sage American educator from the late 19th century, Horace Mann. Actually, it's the early 19th century, it's before 1850. He was I don't know if you've heard of Horace Mann, but he was the great founder of American public education in the state of Massachusetts, is where it started. And he states very clearly the basic implications of recent evolutionary psychology. Both that and microbiology are saying that human education is fundamentally different from the learning of other creatures. And in 1838, he wrote his first report to the Massachusetts legislature as Secretary of the Board of Education. It starts this way. The human being is less endowed with instincts for his guidance than the lower orders of animated creation. Puts Mr. Callisman in sort of in a nutshell in 1838. And Horace Mann goes on, consider his condition when first ushered into life. He's encompassed by a universe of relations, each of which will prove a blessing or a curse. And yet, in regard to all these relations, it is to him a universe of darkness. All his faculties and powers are susceptible of a right direction and control, and if obedient to them, blessings innumerable and inexhaustible will be lavished upon him. But all his powers and faculties are also liable to a wrong direction and control, and obedient to them, he becomes a living wound. And the universe, encompassing relations, presses on only to torture him. Well, anyway, I won't continue with that marvelous 19th century description of early education, but it's intensely moral, of course. He's talking about ethical and moral education, which is deeply important, to say the least. But of course, that's not my focus, because equity, actually, the equity of my work in this field, the emphasis is on language, because that's the secret to equity in early education. Knowledge, and of course the secret to language is knowledge. That's why we started this coherent early knowledge process, which Professor Lopes mentioned, the core knowledge foundation. Now, let me compare Horace Mann's 1838 comment with a 1902 comment by the most influential thinker and writer about education in the United States, who's also had influence over here in Europe as well. It's John Dewey's 1902 book called The Child and the Curriculum, and it opens with, I believe this is the opening sentence of that book. Dewey says, I believe that the educational process has two sides, one psychological, one sociological, and that neither can be subordinated to the other or neglected without evil results following. Of these two sides, the psychological is the basis. The child's own instincts and powers furnish the material and give the starting point for all education. Now compare that to the report of 2005, which says the child's instincts and powers, as far as what needs to be learned goes, is a blank slate. So if you're going to follow the child's instincts and powers, and it's a blank slate, the results are not going to be consistently favorable. Dewey's great virtue is clarity. Romantic that he was, he thought the child's inborn nature will never steer us wrong. He liked to quote Wordsworth. He considered Hegel his master. He believed that there's a pre-established harmony between the needs of society and the inborn nature of the child. He thought, as many of us Americans think, that if we follow the child's natural inborn blueprint and her individual tendencies, all will be well. American teachers are still being taught that this conception was scientifically proved by the developmental stage theory of Piaget. Although the human child does share with other creatures a set pattern of physical development, it doesn't follow a set pattern of psychological development. I think that's the key importance of that new what should we call it, microbiology of the cortex. On the contrary, what Horace Mann accurately conceived has been updated and confirmed by both evolutionary and social psychology. Nature has deliberately withheld its guidance from us humans, except for some power residual impulses, the sex instinct, and other parts of our brains from earlier stages of evolution, but they are not in charge. Nature also says that these need to be guided and overwritten by parenting, social education, all through language schooling, parenting, and moral instruction. So that's the first part of my argument in this talk. The primacy of the social in early education. We can be quite confident that nature herself is saying that society, and not the child's individual instincts and powers, are meant even by nature herself to be in charge of choosing the topics in our elementary schools. Nature is not to choose the topics, it's society that is to choose the topics. Nature is saying that very loudly herself. Then, after I expand a bit on that point, I want to add a few remarks about how nurture and schooling can most effectively follow nature's deference to the mores of the tribe. Let's call them that. That gives it a longer historical thrust. It's not just our national schooling that's evolved. It's the nature of education since humanity began. Nature has shown that we do this most effectively by teaching all of our children a definite knowledge-based curriculum that is commonly shared, especially in the decisive early years. Within that larger socialized context, we should encourage individualism, but I urge you not to assume that this is a settled issue. There may be people in this room who vigorously disagree. It's certainly not settled in the United States. The Dewey point of view, starting with the instincts of the child, is the dominant one in the United States. If you go online at the reading program being recommended at Teachers College, Columbia, which was Dewey's old university, at least Columbia was Dewey's own university, you'll find the idea of starting with the child's individual instincts and powers still firmly in the saddle. I'll just give you a few examples. I think that under the current teaching in Portugal, that you won't find this kind of thing quite as radically in place, but I don't know. I would love to find out more about what's going on that made you successful in recent years. But here's what's going on in the USA. One of the most popular programs for early childhood education is the so-called Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, and it offers classroom libraries of between 500 and 700 colorful small books for each classroom at each grade level, labeled by difficulty, therefore it's individually directed at the child, and focused on multiple topics that the individual child might find interesting. The typical titles are In the Park, I Can't Find My Roller Skates, Tiny and the Snow Dog, Baby Elephant is Thirsty. The teacher is advised to steer the child to a shelf of the proper difficulty level and let the child choose whatever topic captures her personal interest. That, of course, assumes that reading is a general skill. And whenever you practice it and you get better at it, and it's not a stupid theory. If reading were a general skill, then this would of course be a good idea. But as Professor Lopes will tell you, reading is not a general skill. It depends on specific background knowledge in the particular case. And the problem is to build up the child's background knowledge so that when a child reads a text that other people in the culture are reading, or hears a lecture that other people are hearing, that language will be understood. That's the reason for commonality, so that it can be cumulative. I'll have more to say about that. Anyway, I want to not move too slowly through this talk. I want to hear what some of you have to say. And I think the biggest novelty in this current research is simply that the underlying nature of the individual child or the average child is not something that exists in a well-defined way. Human nature is not a well-defined object of that phrase. There isn't a highly defined. There are general tendencies, of course, and general tendencies that a lot of education needs to suppress. Steven Pinker is clearly right that we humans aren't a blank slate, but it's also clear that we don't have a well-defined personality. By the way, I don't know how influential Steven Pinker is in education over here or in general psychology. He's a very good writer, and of course he's a pretty sound psychologist. But everybody, with common sense, I think agrees that it's nature and nurture, and it turns out that nurture is having a much stronger role than Pinker kind of indicated in that 2000 book of his. And it distressed some of his ability to reach a wide public, except some of the more sober cognitive psychologists. But in any case, all of those approaches, I was so glad that Professor Lopes mentioned Mesopotamia. Those reproaches against us teachers for offering a unit on Mesopotamia in first grade as being developmentally inappropriate applied to that phrase. Basically, that phrase, I don't know how current it is in Portugal. It's highly current in the United States in educating the young child, whether a subject or a topic is developmentally appropriate in designing the curriculum. And it's highly suspect, that phrase itself. Anyway, nature's method of encouraging human experimentation by withholding that blueprint. Think of it, how from an evolutionary point of view, how successful that idea of, let's call it nature's idea, that we're going to withhold a definite blueprint. People find themselves in different climates. They find themselves in different situations of all kinds. Societies have to accommodate themselves to these conditions. If they want to survive, they need to, in diverse kinds of environment, you have to devise diverse kinds of societies to do so. So simply from the most basic evolutionary standpoint, it's advantageous to have a large part of human possibility as a blank slate. So that instead of the child's instincts being what's natural, it's society's impositions that are the most natural, because that's the way actually we physiologically are developed. It seems to me, in other words, it's a total reversal of the romantic assumptions that we are born with the right kind of instincts and we will go in the right direction if we follow them and nature follows them. I want to say a few words about teacher training. It seems to me that to the degree that this, and of course implicitly about the child's curriculum, but once I think teachers understand this transvaluation of the curriculum, that we will almost automatically act more intelligently in the way we develop early childhood education. I think Professor Lopez's field of psycholinguistics should be part of the training of primary school teachers. It's the field that explains rather fully the key connections between language comprehension and specific knowledge. And I think there are 3 terms from that field that would be useful for every primary teacher to understand at some depth. The first, the overall term, background knowledge. But then I'd add a couple of other terms, the term situation model and the term speech community. Because I think once their implications are understood, the teachers themselves will all become converts to commonality in the early curriculum. We used to think of language learning as word learning, vocabulary exercises. We knew that a large vocabulary had to entail knowing what those words meant. We studied what those words meant, and we assumed that would do the trick, and that an enlarged vocabulary would automatically grow out of our knowledge of those words and out of schooling. And they're not unsound assumptions. Basically, they're pretty commonsensical, so long as children in our classroom are understanding the language of the classroom. But that's never been the case. Children from disadvantaged circumstances are not understanding the language of the classroom. Children from low-income homes fall further and further behind. That's what's been happening in the USA. And this has given rise to a kind of resigned sociological determinism that nothing can overcome socioeconomic status. But in the 1950s and 60s, we began to understand and highlight the critical importance of the unspoken and the unwritten in language. Take the nursery rhyme. I have to apologize. I don't know any Portuguese nursery rhymes, but I bet they can be analyzed in the same way. But I like to use the English one, which goes, Polly put the kettle on, Polly put the kettle on, Polly put the kettle on, we'll all have tea. And if you just think, well, I mean, we'd say that to our children. Think of setting that verse before a kid from the American slums, one who's been, even a child who's been told what a kettle is. Put a kettle on what? And then what about the social dimension of having tea, which involves a lot more than just drinking tea? And even the simplest background sayings from the simplest nursery rhymes are saying, requiring this general principle of background knowledge. And not just any, but quite specific knowledge. We'll all have tea. So that's specificity of background knowledge. You have to go beyond the generality, leads to the view that it's inherently necessary to construct a situation model, which is a widely used term in psycholinguistics and cognitive psychology. So that's a term I think is useful for future teachers to know. And the last term, speech community. Well, let me give a quick example of why it's necessary to have a situation model. Another nursery rhyme I thought of, Mary had a little lamb. I don't know how many. Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb. Well, it depends on whether it's out in the country or in a butcher shop, obviously. Anyway, accurate interpretation depends on the situation model. And the third term, that term speech community, means that group of speakers who are getting the right situation model when you speak and who are therefore understanding what you speak. That is, who have the range of background knowledge that enables you to understand the speech. And so I want to conclude this. So it seems to me that teachers need to understand that their classroom needs to become a speech community so that everybody in the class will understand what's going on, at least to a large degree. And I think these simple insights powerfully apply to the really complicated complexities of early childhood education. I won't go. I actually had a passage from the core knowledge description of Mesopotamia, which has become obviously between Professor Lopes and me a theme of this talk, but I'm not going to go through the Mesopotamia passage. I think you understand the principle that the job of the elementary school teacher is to make it possible for every child in that classroom to understand what comes next, and to have that understanding and to be enthusiastic, therefore, in dealing with what comes next, to master it. And you do that by creating a curriculum that systematically provides the background knowledge for what comes next. It's very hard to get away from that structural principle and still reach every child. So the aim of making the classroom into a speech community seems like a pretty fundamental general principle for first-rate elementary school teaching and egalitarian elementary school teaching. I'm not going to belabor that because I want to hear from Professor Lopes and you, but I would say that this principle of creating shared knowledge, by the way, it's a well-known principle in educational theory. It's called scaffolding. And so to actually effectuate scaffolding, you need to have a coherent curriculum leading up to the next phase of learning. Let me see. Since I think I see an understanding of this general principle, at least in the faces of these wonderful students up in front, I'm going to turn quickly to, and I'm going to skip any depressing references to current American politics, and end by noting the happy effect that a carefully worked out common sequence of topics has on the young first and second graders and third graders themselves. They love school. They love learning. The results have been quite marvelous in these core knowledge schools, and I won't go into bragging details about that. And of course they love it because they are learning. And as well-formed members of a speech community, they are learning. Here's briefly, I'm going to end on this, is a report in an elementary school in Riverside, California. It was put online by Barbara Davidson, an educational researcher, so it wasn't propaganda from the Core Knowledge Foundation. I quote, Located in a downtown working-class neighborhood, 78% of the Bryant School's students live in poverty. Largely Latino, some 27% are English learners, and from our observation, 100% are engaged, joyful learners. A tour through Bryant's classroom is a celebration of knowledge, from the terracotta warriors on the shelves to the maps of the world, stories about ocean zones and African mass. These students and staff are proud of what they do and what they learn every day, and they choose to show it. I was able to gain knowledge just by looking around the room, and of course, there was much learning happening inside the classrooms, with students exploring in fifth grade what are the techniques and features of Renaissance art and architecture. In second grade, why were waterways important in the War of 1812? Fourth grade, what examples from history and student experience tell us about the role of failure in the inventing process? In first grade, why was farming important to the ancient Mayan civilization? The virtue of a structured sequential curriculum, I was still reading from this report, the virtue of a structured sequential curriculum that was well known and followed faithfully by the teaching staff was evident throughout our visit in statements like, remember, last year in the Middle Ages, the art was all dark and serious, comparing it to the Renaissance, which displays grace and elegance. Or you'll be learning more about the Great Lakes, one of the waterways that were important in the War of 1812. And War of 1812, it seems to be a topos in all of this too. The War of 1812, there's no reason why any of you should know it, but that was the last battle, in a way, of the American Revolution, because the British had invaded again, and the Americans warded them off. That's the main thing that happened, and it's irrelevant in world history, but it's very important in American history. And I want to end the talk with an anecdote from the principal of that school, who's, I asked her for some anecdotes because I heard one in particular that I liked, which I'll read to you right now. She sent me a dozen anecdotes, but actually this was the one that she had mentioned, and which encapsulated sort of what goes on when you have a defined and coherent progressive curriculum for all children. She wrote me this: one morning, quote, this is a quote, I was on the playground before school supervising the students' play. Makaila, a second grade student, came running up to me shouting, I'm so excited for today. I asked, why is that? I expected her to say that it was her birthday or some other special event. But she exclaimed, because today we are going to learn about the War of 1812. I said, gee, I wonder what that's about. I don't know, she said, but today I'm going to find out. So that's the end of my talk.
Can you put this, please?
Oh.
Isto é para a tradução. Para a tradução, okay. If you don't mind, Professor, now I'm going to make just a sum up of some ideas I think that are important, and then we ask the public to make some questions. Okay. Is that okay for you? I'm going to speak in Portuguese to be shorter and fast, okay?
I'll hear it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bom, eu vou, portanto, fazer aqui um pequeno resumo, é a minha própria leitura do que acaba de ser dito, e depois as pessoas poderão fazer as perguntas a que entenderem. Em primeiro lugar, registra-se com agrado esta nossa subida no PISA. Viemos bastante de baixo em poucos anos, desde o ano 2000 até agora. Nós realmente obtivemos resultados extraordinários. Faz-me lembrar, na altura, pensava-se que talvez não fôssemos capazes, mas alguém deve ter pensado qualquer coisa do género, yes we can. E de facto fizemos um percurso extraordinário, provavelmente ainda vamos subir mais alguma coisa. Uma primeira ideia importante, que eu acho que tem a ver com o pano de fundo de toda a comunicação, é a ideia de que a escola, logo desde o início, provavelmente até seria antes, mas desde o início, tem que cuidar muito bem de ensinar às crianças de uma forma organizada, ordenada, sistemática e sem tréguas aquilo que nós pensamos que elas devem saber. Não há geração espontânea do saber ou do conhecimento. É uma transmissão social. Nós estamos perante uma relação e uma transmissão social. Aliás, o que acontece é que uma criança que vai ficando para trás, à medida que o tempo passa, vê alargar-se o gap, o diferencial entre aquilo que ela sabe e a que a média dos sujeitos, dos outros alunos, sabem. É isto, um psicólogo canadiano, o Keith Stanovich, deu o nome de Matthew Effect. Tem a ver com aquela parábola que vem no Evangelho segundo São Mateus, livro de Jó, qualquer coisa do género, os ricos ficam cada vez mais ricos e os pobres cada vez mais pobres. Não é que aqueles que aprendem pouco parem. O problema é que a velocidade delas é baixa e a velocidade da média é relativamente elevada, de maneira que o gap vai se alargando. E é importante ligar isto com a ideia do ensino desenvolvimentalmente apropriado, que se liga à ideia de que os alunos aprendem por maturação. Os alunos não aprendem por maturação. Os alunos aprendem ou porque falam com as outras pessoas, ou porque são deliberadamente ensinadas, e, portanto, estar à espera que haja maturação para que o sujeito eventualmente aprenda a ler. Ou aprenda. Eu podia meter um sujeito durante 3 meses numa biblioteca fechada a 7 chaves, quando chegasse lá, provavelmente estaria morto, mas de certeza que não aprenderia a ler. Quando estamos a falar de ensinar a ler, a escrever, matemática, o que é que seja, temos aqui um ato deliberado. Portanto, a ideia do desenvolvimentalmente apropriado, que de facto, como aqui se diz, terá sido retirada das ideias piagetianas e aplicadas de uma determinada forma à educação, eventualmente é que está surgido que elas não funcionam desta maneira e, de facto, mesmo os estudos experimentais mostram que a aprendizagem não ocorre espontaneamente, ou se ocorre é um ritmo tão lento, que jamais se poderá substituir à escolarização. Depois, há uma coisa importante, uma ideia importante, a ideia de um currículo comum, que o professor Hirsch defende. Um currículo comum para todas as pessoas, que são o tal core knowledge, que uma geração tem a obrigação de passar à geração seguinte. Esta é uma outra ideia importante. Importantíssima também a invocação de Aristóteles, de acordo com o qual nós somos, desde que nascemos e até antes disso, somos animais político-sociais. Esta tese é central em todo o texto e já vamos ver porquê. Há aqui uma evocação muito interessante das neurociências para organizar o pensamento que está expresso aqui nesta comunicação. Normalmente, ou digamos que nos últimos anos, as neurociências são invocadas como se determinassem uma espécie de pré-determinismo para aquilo que nós iremos ou não aprender. É quase a ideia, há uns que nascem para fazer isto, há outros que nascem para aquilo, há outros que nascem para aquele outro. Curiosamente, aqui as neurociências são invocadas para relevar a importância da socialização e da educação e não para sugerir este pré-determinismo. Na verdade, aqui o que se diz, repegando um artigo de 2005 que se chama The Neocortical Microcircuit as a Tábula Rasa, retomando a ideia do Dewey, do John Dewey, a ideia é que, a partir de uma determinada altura, a natureza entrega-nos a nós próprios ou às pessoas que cuidam de nós. Os nossos pais, as nossas escolas, as nossas sociedades, e nesta tábula rasa vai ser inscrito mais ou menos de acordo com aquilo que nos for dado. Há aqui uma frase maravilhosa que diz assim, nós só agora estamos a aprender que sermos unnatural, portanto não naturais, is our great gift from nature. Há quem pense que as escolas nascem nas árvores, eu nunca vi nenhuma nascer nas árvores, embora já tivesse visto em Moçambique aulas dadas debaixo de árvores. Isso é uma outra coisa, não é? Mas quando falamos de escolas, quando falamos de educação, nós estamos a falar de instituições que não são naturais. Elas são, na verdade, altamente sociais. Podem corresponder, provavelmente, a uma necessidade biológica que é a da sobrevivência da espécie. A espécie está mais adaptada ao ter famílias, está mais adaptada ao ter escolas, está mais adaptada ao ter empresas, ao ter hospitais, mas a natureza prepara-nos para isso. Depois, o que virá depois vai depender muito das interações sociais. E esta é uma tese fundamental desta comunicação. E já agora foi invocado aqui o John Dewey, que é um dos principais teóricos da educação americana. Penso que ainda hoje continua a influenciar bastante as ideias da educação nos Estados Unidos. A ideia do Dewey é uma ideia que se cruza com a ideia do bom selvagem do Rousseau. O bom selvagem é, de acordo com o Rousseau, digamos, entre aspas, estragado pelo processo de socialização. Obviamente, aquilo que o professor Hirsch defende é exatamente o contrário, é que se não fosse o processo de socialização, provavelmente podemos, agora da minha lavra, podíamos ter bons psicopatas, mas não necessariamente pessoas que se integrassem socialmente. Outra coisa muito importante, isto tem a ver com a forma como me parece que o professor Hirsch concebe a educação, concebe o ensino, tem a ver com 3 termos fundamentais. Os termos background knowledge, situation model e speech community. O background knowledge é a inscrição social que as nossas famílias, as escolas, whatever, seja quem for, nos transmite e que nos permite, perante um texto qualquer, retirar mais ou menos informação. Quando se retira a informação de um texto, não há informação literal ou facial que interessa mais, mas aquilo que se ativa, e podem ser múltiplas representações que são ativadas, a partir do texto essencial. Muitos miúdos não compreendem textos porque carecem deste background knowledge, carecem ao nível das palavras, mas também carecem ao nível da sintase e, sobretudo, ao nível da semântica, que é onde um texto não é uma coisa de tudo, a leitura de um texto não é tudo ou nada, eu posso ir muito longe, eu posso ir muito perto num texto. Quanto maior for o meu background knowledge, aquilo que eu já sei de trás, isto vê-se muito bem na matemática, não é? Quem não tem bases depois terá muita dificuldade em acompanhar matérias para diante. Outra questão fundamental é do situation model, quando se está a ler um texto qualquer. Situation model aqui é apresentado como algo que permite, por exemplo, desambiguar situações. Se eu tiver um determinado modelo situacional para determinadas frases, foram dados alguns exemplos, já não me lembro como é que era isto. Mary had a little lamb. Pronto, isto. Se eu tiver contexto para ler esta frase, eu perceberei imediatamente o que é que isto quer dizer. Neste texto que está aqui, o professor Hirsch dá um exemplo interessante que é todo homem é humano, Sócrates é humano. Ele diz, bom, para isto é preciso saber que Sócrates é um homem. Nós entendemos que é. Se não tivermos um modelo situacional para isto, podemos pensar o que é que isto quer dizer. Claro que a maior parte das pessoas entenderá isto, mas nem todas as pessoas o entenderão. É isto que se refere o situation knowledge. E, finalmente, a ideia de um speech community. A ideia de speech community tem a ver com a ideia que ele também ilustrou tão bem, a ideia de que um currículo comum dado numa determinada escola constitui uma comunidade de falantes. Isso é algo que aliena uma pessoa do processo educativo, é não estar a perceber o que é que a pessoa está... E, ainda por cima, por exemplo, os professores de matemática têm a horrível mania de falar em chinês. Não é? São horrorosos. Vão sempre falar em chinês para os alunos em vez de falar em português. Podemos expressar-se em português, mas não. Ou em inglês. Tem aquela ideia de falar em chinês. Naturalmente, uma pessoa tem muita dificuldade, obviamente, em processar a informação. Aliás, o sistema, quando é confrontado com inputs que não são digeríveis, o que faz é rejeitar a informação. Quanto mais informação é rejeitada, menor é a probabilidade de eu, na vez seguinte, poder perceber melhor ou perceber outros textos. Mas há aqui uma ideia no speech community que me parece mesmo uma ideia que é uma ideia muito social, política e ideológica, que é a ideia de construir uma sociedade, que aliás no título da comunicação é Forging a Common Language Community and a Nation. and the nation. Portanto, é a ideia de uma comunidade que é uma comunidade nacional, o que permite, por exemplo, perceber determinado tipo de frases que, num outro contexto, num outro país, as pessoas dizem, o que é que querem dizer com isto? Não é que eu seja ignorante, simplesmente sou ignorante relativamente àquela frase, no contexto daquele país, ou o que é que seja. Portanto, há aqui uma ideia, parece-me, uma ideia política e ideológica que é bastante interessante. Finalmente, são dados aqui alguns exemplos, com isto acabo, alguns exemplos que eventualmente para nós pareceriam desenvolvimentalmente inapropriados, não é? Que é estar a ensinar coisas sobre a guerra de 1812 a crianças pequenas. Primeiro porque assim, ensinar coisas sobre a guerra é horroroso. Talvez não quando os miúdos brincam nasquelas plataformas a esmagar pessoas contra a parede, não é? E, portanto, talvez não seja assim tão horroroso. De resto, outra coisa interessante é que a guerra de 1812 foi uma guerra entre os americanos e os ingleses, terminou 0-0, portanto, nem sequer houve algumas carnificinas, mas não terá sido assim tão horrível quanto isso. O que eu acho bem interessante, neste exemplo, como estar a perguntar porque é que é importante a agricultura para a civilização maia, obviamente o que é importante é tratar estes assuntos com uma linguagem que seja compreensível para as crianças, evidentemente. Mas feito isso, este movimento Core Knowledge, o que me parece é um desafio extraordinário. Já agora, o gosto com que se ensina história, o gosto com que se ensina música, é uma coisa absolutamente extraordinária neste tipo de currículo. Se estas escolas conseguem, não sei porque é que escolas noutros países e noutros locais não vão conseguir, nomeadamente em Portugal ou noutro sítio qualquer. Acho que é um desafio fantástico. Muito bem, dito isto, abriríamos aqui um tempo para perguntas, de maneira que desafiava a assistência a perguntar.
Posso iniciar a pergunta? Professor Hirsch, thank you for your very interesting speech. I'm here.
Pode identificar-se, por favor.
Yeah, my name is Eduardo Rua. I'm an entrepreneur.
Okay.
So, Professor, thank you for your interesting speech. I read recently an article that I would like to have your thoughts. It stated that education is one of the 5 sectors in the economy that is in highest risk of disruption by technology. I would like to know your thoughts about that. The second thing I would like to know your thoughts about is, for instance, language has been very important because it's the way we express our thoughts, we vocalize our thoughts, and we share knowledge. What about code? Code is the language of machines. Probably our youngsters today will live much more and will have to interrelate with machines that our generations had to. So isn't code a part of the contents that you think is important today to share with the children? And I remember the Web Summit 2 years ago, the startup that won the premium was a startup that found a system of teaching code to kids from 2 years old. The third thing and last, I won't monopolize the thing, is to give teachers today the possibility of choosing the contents when they don't know what professions these kids are going to have in the future, and some of these professions were not even invented today. Isn't that a very high risk? How do you mitigate that risk? Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to be sure that I understood the question. I understood, I think, question number 2, which was about goals, aims, the aims of education.
No, about coding, about programming machines, the language that machines...
Coding to program
coding.
Machines.
Coding, exactly, sorry.
Coding, codes,
Exactly.
codes. Right. Well, it's my understanding that the ones and the zeros, they go into a language, but then finally the language becomes Portuguese in Portugal, or I guess most people in I'm sorry I can't see you because that light is pretty glaring. But most of, or English, I guess everybody who's hip wants to be hip in the new electronic era learns English. But I don't know. It sounds to me as though you're describing a stage of education beyond grades K through 6. It sounds like you're describing sort of the middle school, high school, and then college level of education. But what I would say about that is that the reason the elementary grades are so very important is that no child is going to reach very far in any of those advanced subjects without being able to be generally proficient learners and to be, it used to be thought among the new critical, let the individual learn what he or she wants. It used to be thought that general skills were being learned. Well, I haven't dealt with that subject in this talk, but I think Professor Lopes would agree with me in saying that the idea of general skills is, on the whole, disputed or rejected. That skills tend to be domain specific. And to gain those domain specifics, if there aren't any general skills, then what is it that the early general education should prepare a child for? Well, I would say it's the shared knowledge that will enable the child to gain those domain-specific skills later on that are involved with encoding and I forget what your third point was, but it sounded like, so you were asking, how do we get beyond this general point to these more specific kinds of knowledge that are needed in the modern world? That was my understanding.
I meant about the risk of giving the decision of the contents to teach the kids when you don't know exactly.
Teachers deciding about the curriculum or even students. The question is, what do you think about teachers themselves choosing the curriculum or even students choosing?
Oh, I see. So, well, I'm very much opposed to that going on in the United States. It's what happens now. The student chooses the curriculum or the teacher student's curriculum because look at the results. The results are very poor from the standpoint of equity. They're students with great potential talents who now under our teacher choice, student choice kind of arrangement, and even down to, well, sometimes it's the school choice. And we have something in the United States called the Common Core. It has no content whatever. Whatever is, it's just vague statements about, certain amount in that domain, certain amount in the other, and no coherent sequence to it. So what has driven me in this whole operation was the notion that commonality is inherently important to language communication. And language communication is inherently important to learning any subject. So if you want to prepare students to learn any subject, they need to have language, the language to gain that knowledge. And the only way they can have the language is to have the shared knowledge of the language community. So essentially the job of education, particularly in the early grades, is to build a common language community, understanding, and this is the novelty, that a language community is not just language. That to have a language community, you have to have shared knowledge as well. That's the very basic point. And I would say it holds for any later subject that you wanted then to progress with more. And then you get into the jargon of those different subjects, and it's fine. And then, but even within that jargon, that needs to be a language community also. There's a wonderful comment by a sociologist named Craig Calhoun. I don't know whether he was of the Calhouns that decided to secede from the American Union, but anyway, Craig Calhoun put it that even people who reject the idea of nationality and want to have globalism and so on, that even people like that actually live in what he called particularistic solidarities. I don't know how I would say that in Portuguese, but he meant that you have to have a language, basically, have to have a language community to exist productively in any kind of society, at no matter what level of society that is. And that's why I think this idea of commonality at the base, which really enables ultimately a democracy to function properly, is what elementary education should be aiming at. And then the problem of these later subjects gets highly diversified, but only on that base of language ability. And you are excluding a lot of very talented people from those higher orders of learning if they haven't got the linguistic and knowledge foundation. Foundation is, I guess, a good metaphor for the whole thing. You need to have a foundation for these later structures. And if you want a democratic form of education, that foundation needs to be shared in common by all kids.
Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think I could speak in English, but I think we have a translator, so I'm going to speak in Portuguese, okay? I think it's better for everybody. O meu nome é Mónica Ribal e, muito rapidamente, eu gostava só de contar uma história, porque nós estamos a falar de histórias de narrativa e do papel da linguagem, e depois fazer uma pergunta no final. Eu gostava de contar a história de uma menina que começou a aprender a ler em 2000, que passou do século XX para o século XXI, passou de uma sociedade sólida para uma sociedade líquida e foram transmitidas estruturas para o que vem a seguir, como aquilo que nós tínhamos falado. Essa menina começou a ler e a escrever e a utilizar a linguagem para descodificar o que lhe ia na cabeça e para entender o que é que acontecia à sua volta. Depois, ela achava que tem a ver com aquilo que nós falámos agora, que ela utilizava aquilo que aprendia na escola para ser uma profissional em qualquer área, não para ser feliz ou para entender o mundo que a rodeava. Ela achava que era a mesma coisa. E ela foi crescendo e foi para a área de ciências e percebeu que não encontrou a verdade na área de ciências. E então, quando acabou o secundário, foi para jornalismo. E ninguém entendeu na família porque é que ela fez isso, mas ela entendia, porque ela foi à procura da verdade. E tirou jornalismo. E trabalhou como jornalista em rádio, em televisão, só que ela percebeu que também não tinha verdade no jornalismo. Mas ela continuava a escrever porque a linguagem, aquilo que ela tinha aprendido a ler e aquilo que ela cada vez escrevia mais e lia mais, criava uma estrutura na cabeça dela de como é que o mundo funcionava. E essa menina voltou para ciências porque não encontrou a verdade. E começou a perceber que a ciência também não lhe dava a verdade porque era uma construção social. As pessoas têm respostas em função das perguntas que fazem. Então, como é que eu vou encontrar a verdade? Afinal, o conhecimento que eu aprendi na escola, em 2000, não me permite ser feliz. O conhecimento não é um objetivo para eu trabalhar. O código é uma questão interessante. Se calhar o código vai ser a forma que nós temos de organizar a sociedade e a forma como nós vemos o mundo. Nós vamos descobrir quem somos, quem estamos, o que estamos a fazer aqui, para onde vamos e de onde viemos através do código, talvez. Mas a linguagem acabou por levá-la a um doutoramento em alterações climáticas para estudar problemas complexos e perceber como é que nós podemos usar a narrativa para entender a incerteza no conhecimento científico. E a minha pergunta é essa, a menina está aqui, sou eu, tenho 25 anos, e gostava muito de entender como é que nós podemos transmitir a partir da linguagem a estrutura, em fundos estruturais mesmo, porque cada vez há progresso na questão de tornar os conteúdos mais próximos da sociedade, a ciência e a sociedade, entender como é que nós utilizamos a linguagem para chegar aos alunos, que neste momento têm acesso à internet, veem as coisas não como caixas, mas como um eixo condutor. Temos a internet, temos uma data de coisas, porque neste momento nós não somos preparados nas escolas para ir para fábricas de montagem, já temos robôs para fazer isso, e na Revolução Industrial éramos, e o sistema de educação continua muito parecido, apesar de todos os esforços à superfície, para treinar pessoas para ir para sistemas fordianos de montagem. E pessoas que aprendem a ler no ano 2000 acabam por ficar frustradas porque entendem que as estruturas que lhes foram dadas na escola não são as estruturas coerentes com a sociedade líquida em que nós vivemos agora, roubando os créditos a Bauman. Por isso, como é que nós podemos fazer uma reforma estrutural profunda da linguagem da educação? Para não aprendermos por caixas, mas aprendermos por intertextualidade e com uma linguagem que faz sentido com a sociedade líquida onde nós estamos. É a minha pergunta. E obrigada pela oportunidade, está a ser muito interessante.
Let me say first that I have these damnable hearing aids on, combined with hearing your voice and the translation simultaneously. And I didn't really get the question. So
Só a pergunta, simplificando.
Try it in English, right?
Como é que nós abordamos os problemas complexos? Try in English, okay. So how can we use the structure of complexity problems like climate change, for example, and change the narrative in schools to educate people to uncertainty and other problems that we didn't have at the past, but we have now? Because language is very important, but we don't have structure in education to speak about complexity. Okay, that's my question, because at the past we didn't have complexity.
The way to solve complicated social problems is by getting some people who basically understand the problem, and then, right, to persuade that's the way I understand the way most things work, then to persuade those, if it's in a democracy, the rest of the people in the society, that this is the right direction to go to solve the problem. So I would say that first of all, you have to have, if for complex current problems, you need to have the kind of system we have now, which is highly specialized, that people understand the causes of climate change, but then they have to persuade the rest of us what we need to do, right? And so you need a literate population in the democracy to be persuaded and to understand. So you do need a pretty high level of general education in the population. So it's a combination, isn't it, of learned people who also can, it's nature of democracy, leadership and so on. It isn't a very complicated structure, but it's very difficult to have, as I see currently very feelingly in the United States. It's very difficult to have if you don't have commonality of communication and comprehension in the demos itself. So that suggests going back to grade 1, 2, 3, so that you have that kind of population and that kind of coherence in the society. I'm very influenced by Emile Durkheim, the great French sociologist, who made the general point that among other things, when he was giving a wonderful lecture to school teachers, that although they wanted solutions to these global, because in the early 20th century, communism was a big attraction, and general socialization, and sort of globalism, the kind of globalistic idea that is very current now. But he pointed out that these organizations don't really have a legislature, and they don't have a mode of political action. So it was very important that the nation be the unifying and universalizing feature. It had to interact with other nations, but it was very important if you wanted universality to solve these huge problems, that the nation state be coherent and effective and democratic. But for that, of course, you need that kind of elementary school where everybody becomes literate and knowledgeable. And you also need to bring opportunity to everybody. So the solution to those problems are not to be found, it seems to me, in elementary school, obviously not. They're to be found in creating a literate population that can understand what students of the subject are saying, and in open debate. I mean, what we're doing right here, you're debating presumably something about educational policy. And Professor Lopes and ourselves seem to be in some degree of agreement about what in principle is needed to have an effective school system. And so then the problem is to convince you and other people in a democratic society that that's the way to go. Isn't that the pattern? But you have to have a literate, if it's a democracy, I hope, I mean, the problem with dictators is that they can be kooky and really and murderous, and so I'm all for democracy, but it needs to be an educated and literate democracy. And the way to do that is to have a well-defined, well-schooled population.
My question is about that idea of a common curriculum. So because there are societies more conservative and liberal than others, and because they share different values, how can we have and create a general consensus and agreement of what subjects should children have?
I think, first of all, we should, that's a key subject, that's a key question. And I think, first of all, we shouldn't avoid that question by saying, either, there are two ways of avoiding it. One is the claim that, well, we just teach general skills, particularly since general skills don't exist, okay? The other way is to say we can't solve it, and therefore we let everybody go his own way, and that's what we have in the United States. It doesn't work. I think the beginning of solving the problem is to recognize it's a problem. And those are various ways of avoiding that recognition. And then I think what I've been sort of encouraging in the United States is to say, okay, you do your thing, but it has to be a sort of K through 8 curriculum that you're trying out. And actually, it turns out that although people say the curriculum is contentious, it isn't. For one thing, there is a kind of already a de facto basis that the educated people already know, and from which uneducated people are excluded. And the pretense that uneducated people have their culture and these educated people have their culture is a false description of what's going on. So if you manage to bring all those kids, the way it's happening in that school in California, up to that level of basic literacy, because you don't have take the language of the newspaper and the language of books addressed to a general reader, you have to already assume what your reader knows. To be an author in that kind of context, you're writing to the general reader. But when you're writing to the general reader, you're already solving the curriculum problem, because you're already saying in your own mind, is that something that my reader will understand if it's a general reader? Of course, it becomes ever more difficult the more diverse and pluralistic the society becomes. But that's all the more reason for the most free society to have a common language. And actually, you know, the history of language standardization was the cradle of democracy in a way. I mean, because then you were basically, that was in the 18th century when that occurred, you're basically including everybody. And if you think language standardization, that Portuguese should be standardized, that all kids should learn the standard Portuguese language, now we know that carries certain implications. It means you have to have the standard Portuguese knowledge as well, at least if you're going to be able to understand this literate level. And so there's a de facto core knowledge, and actually that's what started me. The fact that there is a de facto, you simply have to admit that exists, or there needs to be some starting point. And if people intelligently dissent from that, then it's a democratic debate. But right now, essentially, the subject is, there are those two sides. One, we don't need to do that because we're learning these general non-existent skills. Or the other side, which is saying it's a subject we can't ever solve, so you go your way, which is an evasion. So I think the idea is to acknowledge the problem, and then, because everybody actually, what is the difference between the upper classes and the lower classes in Portugal? I don't know, but I'd be willing to bet it's at least includes a knowledge problem, a knowledge deficit problem. And if it's a knowledge deficit problem, the aim of the school should be to repair the deficit.
Here in Portugal, we have a common curriculum for every school. We discuss from time to time what should be in that curriculum, but after deciding that, at least for 4 years, I don't know, the curriculum is the same for everyone. It's not like in the United States.
Well, maybe that's why you're making progress.
Maybe, but this is 4 years. Since I was a little kid, there was just one curriculum. It's not like in the United States that you can have a school. Yeah. Well, here you can have a school, but you follow the national curriculum. You can have any schools you want, but you must follow the curriculum. That's it.
That's a good idea.
Mais uma pergunta, por favor. Está na hora.
Tenho aqui o microfone.
Se pudesse identificar, por favor.
Okay. My name is João. I'm an engineer as a background, but I'm here because essentially I'm a citizen that is concerned with a kind of a mismatch that it seems to me that school has in the current digital world. And you mentioned Steven Pinker as a proponent that nature is still prevalent instead of nurture. I must say that I agree a bit with him, because as biological machines that we have a lot of flaws. And since the 70s, we already knew that climate change was going to be a catastrophe, but we are not hardwired, our brain is not hardwired to think on a long term. So we ignored it. And that's something that I don't see in schools being addressed, to address something that is not happening just now. Another thing is the biases that we have. That's why we elect leaders, even when we know they are lying, or we share social media, even when we know that we don't confirm if it is true, just because it confirms what we already think. So I don't see critical thinking on the school. Teaching from the elementary level and then upwards. And I think that's a very, very important failure in school today. And it would be good that PISA would add on top of science, reading, and language and math. Because even science, that should be that critical thinking, it's more a formal knowledge transmission. So my question is, when is going to be introduced critical thinking from the elementary level?
I certainly don't want to appear hostile in this agreeable atmosphere. However, critical thinking pushes a button in me because it is the very term that is used by those who oppose any definiteness in the curriculum. It's one of those general skills that people assume. But I have some logician friends. I mean, some people who are very critical thinkers because they do symbolic logic and they know how to think critically and can work out a syllogism very ably. But they are ridiculously illogical when it comes to subjects that they don't know anything about. And so the idea that there is some general critical thinking skill is a topic that has pretty well been debunked in cognitive psychology. I go to well, here we see the nodding of the head of a cognitive psychologist. So if you want critical thinking, be informed. And to be informed, it seems to me, you have to be able to at least read and understand what people who do understand these problems are saying. So if you can blame society for listening to demagogues who are telling you a story that is false, and you can blame society for not being critical thinkers, but it's because they're not informed and because they don't understand the language. They can't understand it in the sense that we're talking about in some reasonably high level. So you want a highly literate, highly informed society. That's what I would say. Generally informed. And then the problem becomes, this young lady was asking, well, what should be the contents of that which will make you generally informed? And that should be an ongoing discussion, but it should be common. I mean, if you want equity and commonality.
To be informed is part of critical thinking.
Yes, exactly, yes.
To select what is the information that is good and is bad.
Right.
May I say one thing about that?
Please.
Oh, yeah. The studies in the area of psychology generally show that you cannot teach directly critical thinking. It's a failure. What you can do is to defy people with different kind of problems, and maybe you can show people that there are different ways to get to a solution, and that's a way of building what you call critical thinking. But what almost all the skills that are called meta, something that is meta, that is above, teach those skills directly is a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you must not lose 1 minute of your time with that, but you must lose all your minutes trying to transmit, give knowledge to people and discuss that knowledge, defying about that knowledge. Is this knowledge logic? Is this correct? Is this possible? That is interesting to develop critical thinking, the idea of defying when you're teaching, but not trying to teach those skills directly. Sorry.
Thank you.
That's for what? Professor.
Bom, boa noite a todos. Penso que encerramos com chave de ouro com este debate o mês da Educação e da Ciência da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. hoje aqui, pela primeira vez, na Biblioteca Teresa e Alexandre Soares dos Santos. Foi um mês intenso de debates sobre estes temas. Tivemos 8 debates em 5 cidades diferentes por todo o país, em Lisboa, em Coimbra, em Aveiro, em Viseu, no Funchal. Temas diversificados, 4 debates sobre educação, 4 debates sobre ciência. E penso que cumprimos assim também, em parte, a missão da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, que é promover o debate na sociedade portuguesa e um debate mais informado. Portanto, trouxemos grandes especialistas portugueses e internacionais para debater, para comentar os temas que são muito importantes para a sociedade portuguesa, como hoje aqui se tornou claro, os temas da educação, os temas da ciência, os temas do conhecimento e o modo como a educação, como a escola se prepara para os novos tempos que aí vêm e como prepara as novas gerações para os desafios que temos do digital aos currículos de ensino. Discutimos também Darwin, enfim, pseudociência, falámos com especialistas portugueses, cientistas pelo mundo. Portanto, podemos percorrer aqui alguns temas importantes. E com isto, com este debate hoje aqui, encerramos este ciclo de debates, este mês de debates em 2018. E queria agradecer a todos, queria agradecer ao Professor João Lopes a presença aqui hoje. Professor Hirsch, thank you very much for being available, for your outstanding speech and for being with us, sharing your knowledge and being available to discuss with us tonight. Thank you very, very much. E a todos, em nome da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, agradeço muito a presença e ficam convidados a participar nas nossas iniciativas no futuro. Próximo ano celebramos 10 anos e, portanto, será um momento renovado para irmos ao encontro de todos. Muito obrigado, boa noite e até breve. Obrigado.